Howdy y'all, and welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast, the show where we explore the stories of various saints throughout history and learn about what they did and how we came to recognize them as saints today. Today, we're going to explore the life of Saint Peter Chanel, a missionary whose death changed lives. Peter Chanel was born in 1803 near Montrevel-en-Bresse in France. He led a rather simple life as a child, helping out on his family's farm with his 7 siblings, and being the 5th of 8 children, he learned a lot from his siblings, both older and younger. But that hands-on education wasn't complete without a more formal school education, so he started attending a nearby school that was headed by Father Jean-Marie Trompier. Though this wasn't the same sort of education you might expect for a young kid. The children Father Trompier taught would follow him throughout the day, and he would teach them as they did other things in the process. They would visit the sick and lonely, celebrate Mass, and complete various chores together. Sounds like a fairly engaging process, right? And it certainly left a mark on young Peter. He read letters from other missionaries while he learned under Father Trompier, and he developed a strong desire to go on missions himself. He didn't really care where they were, he just wanted to go and share his faith on a mission somewhere. When Peter was a teenager, he started at a diocesan minor seminary in Lyons in 1819, and then he moved to the Belley Diocesan College in 1823, and then finally to the major seminary in Brou in 1824. Finally, on July 15th, 1827, he was ordained. Peter's first duty as a priest was to the town of Amberio, but this is a relatively short-lived assignment. Only 1 year later, he asked the bishop to be sent on a foreign mission, but the bishop assigned him to a small parish called Crozet near the Swiss border. And oh boy, did Peter have his work cut out for him there. The parish had seen better days, to say the least. Attendance for Mass was minimal. Nobody volunteered. The children working as altar servers weren't very well versed on what they were supposed to do in that position. And to top it off, the previous priest left suddenly to go on a pilgrimage to Annecy to visit the tomb of Francis de Sales. But Peter was determined. Through hard work, patience, and devotion, he turned around the somewhat neglected parish in just a few short years. The people were moved by his sermons and his ceaseless helping to the sick, all things that he learned in his time learning from Father Trompier. But Peter's desire to go on foreign missions never disappeared. Peter joined the Society of Mary and became a Marist, and the Marists were a new group who strove to live like Mary, humbly, simply, and discreetly. One of their foremost charisms, or acts of service, was to go on missions to foreign lands, which right up Peter's alley. Ironically, Peter's first mission was to serve as a teacher in the minor seminary at Belley. While there, he became a spiritual director and bursar, and then vice superior. In 1833, he traveled to Rome to help the Marists gain final approval by the Church, and then, on February 10th, 1836, Pope Gregory XVI recognized the Marists as a religious congregation and granted that their region of responsibility was Oceania. Their goal was fulfilled, and Peter's dream is finally coming true. He was appointed superior for a group of 7 Marists to begin a 10-month mission to Oceania. However, one of the priests died along the way, so the group was down to 6 Marists in addition to Peter by the time they arrived. And remember, this was like the early to mid 1800s. They had to travel by sea, and it would have been a long voyage to get to Oceania from France. They set sail in the winter of 1836, 1837 from Le Havre, France, which is still a big port to this day. And they arrived on the island of Futuna in late fall of 1837. So almost a full year-long voyage. So while losing one of them was unfortunate, it could have been much worse. Peter and brother Marie Nazier Delorme were disembarked on Fortuna, which was a small island with only about 1,000 inhabitants, and just about all of the inhabitants were fishers or farmers. And there were several small villages on the island. Each one was part of one of 2 kingdoms, and these kingdoms would frequently go to war. They even practiced cannibalism not long before Peter's arrival, which would probably be pretty scary to find out after you arrive there. And they served the wishes of pagan gods who spoke through the chiefs of the kingdoms. So whichever side won the most recent war, the gods would speak to them and tell them what sacrifices they needed to make or what they needed to do to vanquish their opponent, basically. Despite the island's religious practices, they warmly welcomed the Marists because of how kind the Marists were in helping them. King Neoliki, who became the most recent winner of the war between the kingdoms, invited them into his home, fed them, and he protected them. While it was a slow start and the language barrier was hard to overcome, they performed 10 baptisms in the first year, which isn't too bad, though these baptisms were mostly for dying children, which is pretty sad to have to deal with so many in just your first year there. Peter and the other missionary offered mass regularly, and the inhabitants of Futuna offered farming advice to them. It was a sort of reciprocal kindness, and each side was happy with the slow but steady progress. Then, after about a year and a half, another mission of Marists arrived. Together, the group of Marists continued their work with the islanders. Now, I know some will disagree about converting people from their religion and trying to force yours onto somebody else, but it seems like it was fairly voluntary from the islanders to convert. Plus, I haven't heard of many pagan religions that have like an in-depth concept of heaven and hell or an equivalent. From what I've researched, they're predominantly right now, or whatever happens to you afterwards is already set in your actions now, don't matter. So the idea that if they lived graciously now, then after they died, they could live in eternal bliss is probably pretty provoking given their war-based religion and how violent it was and how focused on their life right now it was. But then the king's infant son became ill, and Peter sought permission to baptize him because he felt that this was a great opportunity to help the child. And if the inhabitants saw their king starting to accept Christianity himself or in his family, that they would be more likely to convert themselves. And he was partially correct. Many of the islanders did start to convert. But by the end of 1840, the king realized that the power and influence he once held as the voice of the gods was dwindling. He began being hostile towards the Marists. And then he heard the entire island of Wallace, which was nearby, was going to be baptized. He was reaching his boiling point, and he didn't want his island to be baptized. He didn't want to follow in Wallace's footsteps. His frustration finally boiled over when his son, Metala, sought to be baptized. On April 27th, 1841, the king sat his son down and talked to him, attempting to convince him not to be baptized. But Metala had already made up his mind. King Nyuliki had to put a stop to this, though. He told his son-in-law, Musimusu, that Peter had to be stopped, and Musimusu was sent to kill the Marists. He gathered a large group of men, and they went to Peter's abode. And when they got there, they clubbed Peter. And he may have already been dead, but Musimusu wanted to be sure, so he struck Peter in the head with a hatchet, and Peter was absolutely dead at that point. This event had the opposite effect that King Nyuliki wanted. The people he once ruled over were incredibly mournful about Peter's death. And King Nyuliki began to regret his decision too. Within the next few years, the entire island of Futuna was converted and baptized. And to this day, they practice their Catholic faith and celebrate their martyr, St. Peter Chanel. Supposedly, Musimusu regretted his actions shortly after he killed Peter and converted as well. He made the request, though, to be buried outside the church that held St. Peter's relics, and his idea was that people would have to walk over his grave on their way to honor Peter as a form of eternal penance for his actions. There are a few relics for St. Peter Chanel in the reliquary chapel on the campus of the Basilica, in addition to those in the Church of Futuna, but Musimusu would be buried at the Church of Futuna, not at Basilica. St. Peter Chanel is the patron saint of Oceania because he was their first martyr, and he had a profound impact in that region. He was beatified November 17th, 1889, and canonized June 12th, 1954. His feast day is April 28th, and it's actually a public holiday in Futuna and Wallace. What do you think of St. Peter Chanel? I hope you found his story interesting. Do you think it'd be cool to go on a mission like Peter did? Minus the dying part, of course, just a mission in general. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on Peter Chanel, and thank you for listening. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe, download the episode, like, comment, share it, or send me a suggestion on a saint to check out by emailing me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. You can find the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, and more. Just search Sanctified Podcast on your preferred medium, and I should have some episodes uploaded. If I don't, then let me know, and I'll work on getting them on that medium. Take care, and I hope you have a wonderful day.